Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We knew there'd be fraud because fraud is always connected to money. I supported the CARES Act. That was the nation's initial response to the new virus. We didn't know what it was. The CARES Act was our effort to respond and to help American families and American employees remain financially stable while we endured the impact of this unknown virus. So here we are into year 4 of 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and is very well falls upon this committee under Republican majority to begin conducting meaningful oversight into the massive fraud that was no doubt staged to take place when you start rolling out programs with trillions of dollars. Some estimates as high as $7 trillion, the total economic commitment from the United States of America. American treasure, $7 trillion. That's 7,000 billion. It's 140 billion per sovereign state. There's an average of 62 counties per state. That's over 2 billion per county. I would argue that Americans across the country in local and state government would say they'd have done much better if every county could have received $2.2 billion in the form of a block grant. Of course, there was going to be massive fraud with programs like this, but what we expected was not the absence of fraud. What Americans expected is the presence of accountability and criminal prosecution. And that's what that accountability is what this Republican-controlled oversight committee is going to deliver. We know fraud is not born in the mechanisms of man. Fraud is born in the heart of man. It's to be anticipated. The gentleman referred to certain trade-offs between urgency and processes that were put in place as these trillions of dollars were set to be dispersed. Well, may I say that we anticipated this, but some of us, in order for the most conservative of us to support a $2 trillion response to this unknown virus, we insisted that this money be made available through local banks and credit unions, and we pushed the SBA product out through, my recollection is about 4,500 lending institutions that had never handled SBA product before. We wanted and we insisted that regular Americans would be able to communicate directly with the bankers they knew to access this assistance. So we knew it was ripe for fraud, but we expected criminal investigations to take place, and we expected people to be put in jail. Accountability for criminal acts generally begins with a suspicion and a report at the local level of fraud, theft, forgery, identity theft, etc. That leads to an investigation, should lead to an arrest, should lead to prosecution, should lead to conviction and incarceration. May I say, America would be just fine had we witnessed that kind of accountability. But it has to be pushed out of congressional investigations. That hasn't happened for the last 3 years. It will happen now. Director Smith, sir, specifically regarding investigations, that it's understandable that the most massive cases will be prioritized, millions and millions of dollars. But according to my research, the vast amount of fraud that we have witnessed is primarily from smaller cases, and I've been advised that they've gone ignored. Can you speak to that, sir? What are we doing at the federal level to assist local and state investigators to go after these smaller cases?
Sir, as I mentioned before, we follow money, we follow evidence, and one of the things that I talked about in my opening was the Secret Service training state, local law enforcement professionals at our National Computer Forensics Institute. It's the ultimate teach a man to fish, if you will. We train thousands of state and local law enforcement professionals every year to be able to investigate cases locally. I was just down in the chairman's home state last week in Kentucky, talking to some of our cyber fraud task force partners, and they were actually briefing me on cases they were working at a local level that were focused on elder abuse and some pandemic-related fraud. So we are a federal law enforcement entity, but we do have a responsibility to help train, equip, and resource our local partners who help us in every aspect of our mission to be able to build their capacity locally.
Thank you for your response, Director. Mr. Chairman, I yield.